The Tide We Carry. Chapter 1: The Shore Between. They met in the rain, where the sea pulled back like it had secrets. She held her shoes, hair plastered to her cheeks, staring at the horizon as if it could answer her unspoken question. He stopped a few steps away, unsure if he was intruding or finally arriving. The seaside behind them slow and patient. He had come to be alone, he told everyone. Truth was, the city had grown too full of ghosts. Voices from old lectures, the scrape of her chair on the kitchen floor before she left. Here at the shore there was less to remember. The rain had eased. She turned, saw him, didn't move. Gray eyes in the flat morning light. "You came early," she said. He frowned. "I don't think I'm the one you're waiting for." "Maybe not," she said. "But you're here." There was no one else on the beach. Only the gulls picking at seaweed near the rocks. He walked closer. "Do you always wait for strangers in the rain?" "Only when the sea feels different," she said. "Today it feels older." He laughed a little. "That's a strange thing to say." "I didn't say it was wrong." He wanted to ask her name but didn't. Felt too soon, too deliberate. There was something in her voice that didn't belong to questions. They stood side by side for a while, facing the line where the gray sky met the gray water. The world had narrowed to those two colors. "You live here?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "When I can stand it." He nodded, understanding without knowing why. The tide crept closer. Waves folded themselves into quiet. She turned then, looking at him fully. "You're not from here." "No. You have the look of someone who left something behind." He smiled faintly. "Most of us do." She studied him for a moment as if deciding something. "There's a cafe up the road. They'll have firewood burning by now. You can dry off." "I don't mind the rain. Everyone says that until they start shivering." He wanted to keep standing there, but she was already walking away. Her footprints filled slowly with water. He followed. The cafe was small, tucked behind dunes and weathered pine. Its windows fogged with the warmth inside. The bell above the door gave a tired ring as they entered. An old man stood behind the counter, wiping glasses with a faded cloth. He nodded when he saw her. "Morning, Claire," he said. "Morning, Eli," she replied. "2 coffees, please. Strong." She motioned to a corner table near the fire. He sat opposite her. The rain had turned heavier, tapping on the windows in uneven rhythm. "Claire," he repeated quietly. "So that's your name." She smiled. "It is today." He waited for more, but she didn't offer it. The fire crackled. Wood smoke curled through the room, softening the edges of the air. He took a sip of coffee. It was bitter but real. "I'm Daniel," he said finally. "I figured," she said. "How? You have that look. A Daniel look. What does that mean?" "Like someone who thinks too much and sleeps too little." He laughed. "That's about right. I used to know a Daniel once," she said. "He wrote poems about ships. Said every departure was just a disguised return." Was he wrong? She stared at the window. Most poets are. The silence that followed was easy. It had weight, but not the heavy kind. He found himself watching her hands, steady, unhurried. There was a ring on her thumb, silver and worn smooth. "You're not married," he said. She looked at him with mild amusement. "No. Are you?" "Not anymore." "What happened?" He thought about lying, but something about the rain against the glass made honesty seem simple. "She stopped believing in me. Or I stopped deserving it. It's hard to tell which came first." Claire nodded slowly. "That's usually how it goes." He studied her face. There was no sympathy there, only recognition. "Are you a teacher?" she asked. "Was," he said. "American literature." "Of course," she said. "You have that way of talking. Careful with your words, like you're grading them as you go." He smiled. "Old habits." "Hemingway," she said suddenly. He blinked. "What about him?" "You look like the kind of man who rereads Hemingway when the weather turns bad." He chuckled. "I used to assign him. Students either loved him or thought he was cruel." "Maybe both," she said. "He wrote about love the way storms talk about calm. Always on the edge of it." He looked at her a long time. "You sound like you know what that means." "Maybe I do." Eli brought a plate of bread and butter. They ate quietly. Outside, the rain softened again. When she spoke next, her voice was lower. There's a house near the cliffs. My father built it when I was a child. It's mostly empty now. You can see the sea from every window. Sounds peaceful. Peaceful can be dangerous, she said. It makes you think too much. Maybe that's what I came here for. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you came to remember something you tried to forget. He looked down at his hands. They were older than he liked to admit. Would you like to see it? She asked. He hesitated. The house. Yes. The sea looks different from there. Closer somehow. He thought of refusing. Then he thought of returning to his rented room, with its pale curtains and damp air. All right, he said. Show me. They walked along the road that wound between dunes and low stone walls. The rain had stopped, but mist clung to the air, softening everything. She walked ahead, coat unbuttoned, hair still damp. He followed, feeling the strange quiet that comes when two people are about to cross into something unknown. When they reached the house, it was smaller than he'd imagined. Weathered wood, a sagging porch, one shutter missing. The front door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of salt and thyme. There's no electricity, she said. The generator broke years ago. That's fine. She lit a lamp. The room filled with a soft amber glow. A few books sat on a table, Hemingway among them, beside a stack of notebooks tied with string. You write? He asked. Sometimes, she said. Letters I never send. Things I want to remember without keeping. He nodded. That makes sense. She set the lamp on the windowsill. The sea stretched beyond, gray and endless. Waves crashed against the rocks below. When I was little, she said, I used to think the sea kept secrets. My father told me it only reflected what you already knew. And what do you know now? That I was wrong to leave for so long, she said softly. And maybe wrong to come back. He wanted to say something, but the words felt clumsy. So he stepped closer to the window, watching the light fade over the water. You can stay a while, she said after a moment. If you'd like. He turned to her. Why? She met his eyes. Because you look like someone who won't break the quiet. He smiled, though it hurt a little. That's not always a virtue. It is here. She went to the kitchen to make tea. He stood alone, listening to the wind move through the boards. The sea sounded nearer, as if pressing its ear to the walls. He looked at the books again. One of the notebooks was open. Inside, in small careful handwriting, was a line. Love is the tide that leaves no footprints. He closed it gently. When she returned, she handed him a cup. You found my ghosts, didn't you? I think they found me. She smiled faintly. They usually do. They sat near the window, drinking in silence. Outside, the horizon blurred into the water. He felt the day fold around them, soft and inevitable. There was a comfort in it and something else. A pull like the tide drawing them both toward the same deep place. As dusk fell, she lit another lamp. The light made her eyes look darker. Do you believe in second beginnings? She asked. He thought about it. Only when they come by surprise. She nodded. Good. That's the only kind worth having. He watched the sea again. It seemed to breathe with them, in and out, steady as the rain had been. The night thickened. Somewhere far off, a buoy bell rang. She rose to close the door, then paused. You can stay in the guest room, she said quietly. It's small, but it doesn't leak. He hesitated. All right. She handed him a candle. Their fingers brushed. Small, electric, honest. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Claire. Later, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, he listened to the sea moving in the dark. Each wave seemed to speak in a language he half remembered. The wind pressed against the shutters, not unkindly. He thought of her voice, how it carried something both tender and distant, like a song sung only once. He thought of the books on the table, of the line he'd read. Love is the tide that leaves no footprints. He repeated it silently, as if it might anchor him. Outside, the sea rose higher. He wondered if she was still awake in the next room, listening to the same sounds. He almost called out, but didn't. Instead, he let the rhythm of the waves pull him under, slow and deep, until he was not sure whether he dreamed or remembered. And somewhere between sleep and waking, he saw her standing again on the shore, shoes in hand, watching the horizon. The sea breathed around her, waiting. Chapter 2, the morning after the rain. The light came slowly, pale and soft through the curtains. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the air washed clean. The sea outside was calm again, its surface broken only by a few gulls drifting low over the tide. Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of a kettle whistling. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then the shape of the room, the old wood ceiling, the rhythm of the sea, all of it came back. He sat up listening. Somewhere down the hall Claire was moving. Light footsteps, then the sound of a cup set on a table. He found his shoes by the bed, still damp from yesterday's rain. When he stepped into the hallway, the floorboards gave under his weight. Claire looked up when he entered the kitchen. She was barefoot, wearing a sweater that looked too large for her, sleeves pushed to her elbows. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No," he said. "The sea did." She smiled faintly. "It has that habit." She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it across the table. The steam rose between them. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Some. You looked like a man fighting with his dreams." He smiled. "I usually lose." She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, comfortable but full of something unspoken. Outside, the horizon brightened. The clouds were breaking apart, drifting like pale sails. "You can stay another day if you'd like," she said. "No one uses the house but me. I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't," she said. "The walls need new stories." He looked around. The place had that lived-in quietness of houses that have held too many years. There were photographs on a shelf, some fading, some turned face down. He nodded. "Then I'll stay." Claire didn't seem surprised. She turned back to the stove, stirring something in a pan. "You're not one of those people who need plans, are you?" she asked. "Not anymore. Plans started making me nervous." "Good," she said. "The sea doesn't care for them either." After breakfast, they walked down to the cliffs behind the house. The wind had shifted east, carrying the scent of wet grass and salt. The ground was soft beneath their shoes. Claire moved easily over the rocks, like someone who knew every uneven step. Daniel followed, watching the waves crash below. "When I was a child," she said, "my father used to bring me here after storms. He said the sea always gave something back if you waited long enough." "Did it?" "Sometimes. Shells. A rope. Once an old bottle with nothing inside." He smiled. "Even the sea keeps secrets." "Yes," she said quietly. "Especially the sea." They stopped near the edge. From there the coastline stretched in both directions, curving like a long arm into mist. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" "Whatever you left behind." He thought about it. "Some of it," he said. "Most of it I only pretend to miss. It's easier that way." She nodded. "Pretending keeps the edges smooth." "And you?" he asked. She looked out over the water. "I missed the quiet. I thought I wanted noise, cities, people. Then I realized noise is only another kind of loneliness." He studied her face. There was something in the way she said it, like confession without regret. They walked back toward the house as the sun climbed higher. The light caught in her hair, and he noticed strands of silver among the dark. It suited her. On the porch, she sat on the steps and lit a cigarette. He leaned against the railing. "I thought you'd quit," he said. "I have," she said, exhaling. "Many times." He smiled. "I understand that." She looked at him. "You have that professor look again. The one that weighs words before letting them out. Force of habit. What did you teach them, your students? About what people write when they're too afraid to say it. And what did they learn?" He shrugged. "Mostly that life is shorter than books make it seem." She laughed quietly. "You sound like Hemingway." He smiled. "He'd probably say I sound like a man who's lost his compass." "Maybe that's the same thing," she said. He didn't answer. The wind shifted again, bringing the low hum of waves. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her. "Something true." "Yes. Not clever. Not safe. Just true." He hesitated. "I'm afraid of forgetting," he said finally. "Not the faces. The feeling." She nodded slowly. "That's a good truth. Here's mine. I keep coming back to places that never asked me to. They looked at each other a long time. The quiet between them had changed. It wasn't absence now, it was space waiting to be crossed. That afternoon, clouds began to gather again. The light dimmed. Claire brought in wood for the fire. He watched her from the doorway. You always prepare for rain? He asked. Always, she said. Even on clear days. It's easier to be ready than surprised. He helped her with the logs. Their hands brushed once, twice. Neither mentioned it. When the fire caught, she sat close to it, holding her knees. The warmth flickered across her face. Do you ever write now? She asked. Not much. I stopped when words started sounding dishonest. You could start again. Maybe. Write something about this place, she said. The sea, the quiet, the people who forget what they came for. He smiled. You'd be in it. I'm already in it, she said. You just haven't written me yet. He felt that line land somewhere deep, where reason couldn't follow. Evening fell early. Rain began again, light but steady. They ate soup by the fire. Outside, the windows rattled in the wind. She leaned back in her chair, watching the flames. You think too much about endings, she said. Don't we all? No, she said softly. Some of us think about beginnings we never had. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the tone in her voice stopped him. Instead he said, I think maybe they're the same thing. Endings and beginnings. She looked at him. You sound like the man who used to live here. Your father. She nodded. He said everything returns to the sea, even what doesn't belong there. The fire cracked. He saw her eyes glint in the light, tired but alive. Do you believe him? He asked. I used to. Now I'm not sure if he meant it as comfort or warning. Maybe both. They sat without speaking. Rain whispered against the roof. When she stood, he thought she might go upstairs. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out. The tide's high tonight, she said. It reaches the rocks when the moon's full. He joined her. The moonlight caught on the waves, silver and restless. It's beautiful, he said. It's dangerous, she corrected. That's why it's beautiful. Later, when she went to light another lamp, he stopped her. Leave it, he said. The dark suits the night. She nodded and set the match aside. For a long moment they just stood there, the sea murmuring beyond the walls. She turned toward him then, close enough for him to see the fine salt lines dried on her cheeks. You're thinking again, she said. About what? About how long this can last. He smiled faintly. Maybe I was hoping it doesn't have to end. She looked at him, steady and unreadable. Everything ends, Daniel. That's what makes it real. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that not everything had to break. But the words stayed behind his teeth. She moved past him, brushing his shoulder lightly. Good night, she said. He turned as she reached the stairs. Claire. She stopped. Thank you for letting me stay. She looked back. You're not a guest, she said. Not anymore. Then she went up, leaving him with the fire, the rain, and the slow heartbeat of the sea. He stayed there for a long time, watching the flames sink into coals. He thought about her father, the empty notebooks, the bottle she once found with nothing inside. He thought of the look in her eyes when she said everything ends. Outside, the wind shifted again. The sea was rising. He walked to the window. The waves struck the rocks with quiet fury, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The same sea that had carried him here, though he hadn't known it was carrying him. He whispered, everything returns. And for a moment he believed it. Chapter 3: The Edge of the Tide. The wind had shifted overnight. By morning the air was heavy, the kind that promises rain without delivering it. The sea was darker too, its calm restless now, like something thinking. Daniel woke early. The house was still. The fire in the hearth had burned out, leaving only a trace of smoke. He made coffee on the old stove, listening to the slow drip of water from the eaves. He found Claire outside, standing barefoot in the grass behind the house. Her hair was loose. She was watching the horizon. Storm coming, he said. She nodded. You can feel it in your ribs before it shows in the sky. He handed her a cup. She took it without looking at him. You used to live near the sea? She asked. No. Mountains. Then what brought you here? He thought for a moment. The sound, he said. It keeps you honest. That it does. They stood there a while, the coffee cooling between their hands. By noon the wind had grown stronger. The sky pressed low, gray and swollen. The sea moved in slow, heavy swells that reached farther up the beach than before. Claire closed the shutters on the north windows. If it turns bad, the power lines will go first, she said. They're already gone, he replied. She smiled faintly. Good. Then it won't surprise us. They worked together through the afternoon, bringing in wood, fastening the loose latch on the door. He found a satisfaction in the simple tasks, the quiet rhythm of them, the sense of doing something necessary. When the first drops of rain came, they were large and deliberate. Claire set a lamp on the table. This is how it always starts, she said. Soft, polite, then it forgets its manners. The storm broke an hour later. The wind rose fast, slamming against the house, rattling the shutters like fists. Rain fell in sheets, each gust finding its way through cracks in the old boards. The lamps flickered. Daniel and Claire sat by the fire listening. It sounds alive, he said. It is, she answered. It always was. The sound filled the room, wind, water, the low rumble of waves colliding with rock. Somewhere in that noise, Daniel felt something loosen inside him, something that had been held too long. He turned to her. You're not afraid? Not of this. What then? She looked at him, her face lit by the unsteady firelight. Of calm, she said. Calm never lasts. He nodded. That's true. Outside, lightning flashed, followed by a deep, rolling thunder. The room glowed for a second, her face, his hand, the lamp, the edges of everything briefly clear before fading back to shadow. She stood and walked to the window. The shutters trembled. She placed her hand against them as though steadying the wind. Sometimes, she said, it feels like the sea remembers every wrong thing we've ever done. He came beside her. And forgives them? Not exactly. It just keeps them. He watched her hand against the wood. The veins on her wrist were fine, almost blue. Claire, he said quietly. She didn't move. Yes. When this ends, what then? She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Does it have to end? I don't know, he said. But things like this usually do. Then let's not name it, she said. If we don't name it, maybe it stays. He smiled. That sounds like something Hemingway would say. She laughed softly. Or something he'd drink to. The next thunderclap drowned the sound of her laughter. Later, when the wind began to ease, they sat closer to the fire. The storm had changed its shape. Less fury now, more rhythm. The rain fell steady, almost gentle. He said, You never told me why you came back here. She looked into the flames. I told you once I left for the noise. What I didn't say is that I left because of a man. He waited. He was kind, she said. But kindness can turn heavy when it's all that's left. I woke one morning and realized I couldn't breathe next to him anymore. So you left? Yes. Did you love him? She thought about it. I think I loved the idea of him. That's the easier kind. He nodded slowly. I know that kind. You. He smiled faintly. My wife and I stopped talking long before we stopped speaking. I thought that was peace. It wasn't. Claire looked up. And now? Now I'm here, not talking again, but it feels different. She smiled. Maybe that's because this silence listens back. He met her eyes. Something passed between them then, quiet, certain. When the storm finally began to move out to sea, the air in the house grew still. The fire was down to coals. Claire rose and went to the door. She opened it. The wind carried the scent of salt and wet earth. Come on, she said. He followed her outside. The rain had thinned to a mist. Above the cliffs, the clouds were breaking open, showing a pale strip of moon. The ground was slick beneath their feet, the grass flattened by wind. The sea below was restless but retreating, pulling its strength back toward the horizon. Claire turned her face to the sky. It's always like this, she said. After it's spent itself, it forgets how to stop. He stood beside her, watching the waves draw back. You can almost hear it breathe. She looked at him. You still think you came here by chance? He hesitated. You think it was something else? I think the sea brings people together for its own reasons. It doesn't explain them. He wanted to believe that. She stepped closer, so close he could feel the damp heat of her skin. You could leave tomorrow, she said softly. Or you could stay until the next storm. He looked out over the dark water. And if I stayed? Then it would be harder to leave. He turned back to her. The wind brushed strands of her hair across her mouth. He lifted his hand, touched them away. Her breath caught, quick and quiet. She said, "You shouldn't." He whispered, "I know." And then she leaned into him. The kiss was slow, without decision. It carried the same rhythm as the tide, pulling, retreating, returning again. When they parted, she looked at him for a long time. "Now it's begun," she said. "What has?" "The part that can't last." They walked back to the house without speaking. The air had cooled. The mist had turned to fine drizzle. Inside, the lamps had burned low, the fire nearly out. She set her hand on his arm before going upstairs. "You'll still be here in the morning?" "Yes," he said. She nodded once. "Then good night." "Good night, Claire." He stayed at the window long after she had gone. The storm clouds moved out to sea, leaving the horizon pale and empty. Lightning flashed once, far away, and then only the low roll of waves remained. He thought of what she'd said about the sea keeping what it takes, about not naming things that matter. He wondered if love, like the tide, only looked like retreat when it was gathering strength to return. The house creaked as it settled in the wind. He set another log on the fire and watched it catch. Outside, the sea was already rising again. Chapter 4: The Calm Between. The morning was pale and clear, the kind of light that makes everything look newly washed. The sea had gone still again. Only a low hiss of foam remained on the rocks. Daniel woke to the sound of gulls. He could smell coffee. When he went down, Claire was at the stove, her back to him. She didn't turn when he entered. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He waited for her to look at him, but she didn't. The air between them held a new shape, like something that had been folded overnight. He poured himself a cup. The mug was chipped at the rim. "You sleep?" she asked. "Not much." "Me neither." He wanted to say something light, something that would break the quiet, but nothing came. They took breakfast on the porch. The boards were damp from the storm. The horizon was soft again, a faint blue line between sea and sky. Claire looked tired. The skin beneath her eyes was shadowed, her hair still tangled from sleep. She held her cup with both hands, staring into it as if reading something there. He said, "The storm's gone. For now. You think it'll come back?" "They always do." He nodded. "You ever get used to it?" "No," she said. "You just learn what to hold on to." He smiled faintly. "And what's that?" She looked at him then, her gaze steady. "Whatever doesn't break when the wind comes." The day passed quietly. Daniel fixed the shutter on the west window. Claire worked in the garden, pulling the weeds that had come up after the rain. The sky stayed clear, but the air still carried the scent of salt and iron. At noon they ate bread and cheese in the shade. Claire spoke little. When she did, her voice was soft, as though she were still half inside the storm. He said, "I started writing again." Her head lifted. "You did." "Just a few lines. Nothing worth keeping." "That's where all the good things start." He hesitated. "It's about this place." She smiled faintly. "Then it's already half true." "What do you mean?" "This place makes honesty easy," she said. "There's nowhere for lies to hide." He wrote later that afternoon, sitting by the window. The words came slow but steady. He found himself writing not about the sea, but about her. About the way she looked when she listened, or the sound of her footsteps on the porch when the house was quiet. When he looked up, the light had changed. Claire was at the edge of the cliff again, facing the wind. He watched her for a long time. She didn't move. That evening they sat by the fire. The house smelled of wood smoke and salt. Claire said, "I used to think silence meant peace. Then I learned it can mean distance too." He nodded. "And now?" "Now I think it depends on who's in it with you." He smiled. "Then what does this silence mean?" She looked into the fire. "It hasn't decided yet." They didn't talk much after that. The fire burned low. Outside, the tide began to rise again, steady and patient. He thought of the night before, the storm, the kiss, the feel of her hand at the back of his neck. It was already beginning to feel unreal, like something half-dreamed. When she stood, he thought she would go upstairs again, but she didn't. She crossed to him, slow, uncertain. She stopped just close enough for him to feel her breath. "I don't want this to be a mistake," she said. "It isn't," he said. "You can't know that." "No," he said. "But I can choose to believe it." She looked at him, eyes tired, mouth soft. "Belief is dangerous. So is regret." She gave a small laugh, almost a sigh. "You sound like my father." He smiled. Was he right about anything? "Sometimes," she said. "Mostly when it hurt to admit it." She leaned forward then, resting her forehead against his shoulder. They stayed like that, not moving, the firelight flickering across the walls. Later, when she slept beside him, Daniel lay awake listening to the sea. The waves were small now but steady, like the sound of breath through sleep. He thought of the life he'd left, of the books stacked in his old office, of the hollow quiet that used to follow him everywhere. That quiet wasn't here. This one was different. It had pulse and temperature. It lived. He reached for his notebook and wrote a single line. "The sea remembers what the heart tries to forget." Then he closed it and watched the faint light move across the ceiling until morning. When he woke, Claire was gone. He found her outside again, sitting on the rocks with her knees pulled to her chest. The sky was gray but calm. He said, "You always wake before me." "I don't sleep much," she said. He sat beside her. The rock was cold beneath them. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed away?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. But I wish I hadn't waited so long to come back." "Why?" "Because waiting changes the shape of things. Even the sea looks different after too many years." He nodded. "Maybe that's what time does." She looked at him. "And what about you? You planning to disappear again once the weather turns?" He smiled slightly. "You want me to?" "I didn't say that." "But you thought it." She laughed quietly. "You really are a professor." He looked at the horizon. "I was a man before I was that." "Yes," she said. "And now?" "I'm not sure yet." "Maybe that's enough," she said. They walked the shoreline after breakfast. The sand was damp and cool. Driftwood lay in pale pieces along the tide line. She picked up a small shell, smooth and white. "Look," she said. "Perfect except for the crack." He took it from her hand. "That's what makes it worth keeping." She smiled. "You think everything broken is worth keeping?" "No," he said. "Just what still remembers how to shine." She looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she turned and kept walking. That afternoon he went back to his notebook. He wrote until the light dimmed, until the words blurred. The story that was forming wasn't about the sea anymore. It was about the moment before the storm, the stillness that comes when people pretend not to be afraid. When he stopped, Claire was on the porch again watching the sky. "Writing?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. What if it's about you? Then you'd better write it honestly." He looked at her. "You think I can?" "You already are," she said. That night, the sea was quiet again. The wind had died. The house creaked softly, content. Claire lay with her head on his shoulder. "This won't last," she said. "I know. Does that scare you?" "Yes," he said. "And no." "Why no?" "Because it's here now." She smiled in the dark. "That sounds like something worth remembering." They lay there, listening to the faint pulse of waves against the shore, the slow breath of a house that had seen too many storms and too few calm nights. He thought, this is the calm between. And though he didn't say it aloud, she must have known, because she reached for his hand and held it until morning. Chapter 5: When the Wind Returns. The calm lasted 3 days. Then the wind returned. It came quietly at first. A low stirring through the pines behind the house, the kind of sound that makes you lift your head without knowing why. By noon the clouds had thickened, pale gray against the water. The air carried a damp edge again, salt and iron mixed. Daniel was on the porch, writing. Claire was down by the rocks, her hair pulled back, a scarf around her throat. The wind caught it sometimes, lifting it like a flag. He watched her, but she didn't see him. She was looking out toward the horizon, where the first whitecaps had begun to appear. He wrote one line and stopped. The sea always comes back for what it leaves behind. When she came up the path, her face was flushed. It's changing, she said. You can feel it in the ground. He nodded. You think it'll be bad? Hard to say. The sea decides that. They went inside. The house creaked as the wind pressed against it. A pot rattled in the kitchen. Claire began closing the shutters. We should tie the porch door this time, she said. The hinge won't hold another night like the last one. Daniel found a length of rope in the shed. The smell of damp earth and oil filled the air. When he came back inside, she was standing by the table, looking at the notebooks he had left open. You wrote more, she said. A little. About us. He hesitated. About what happens when two storms meet. She smiled without humor. That sounds about right. He set the rope down. Do you mind? No. Just don't finish it yet. Why not? Because once it's written, it ends. He looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she said, Help me with the door. The afternoon darkened fast. The sky took on that bruised color storms were before breaking. Gulls flew low, their cries sharp and thin. Inside, the house filled with the smell of wood smoke. Claire stirred a pot on the stove while Daniel set the table. He said, You ever get tired of being right about the weather? I'd trade it, she said, for one wrong guess that didn't hurt anyone. He smiled a little. You talk like someone who's lost more than she's told. Maybe, she said. But I'm still here. He wanted to reach for her then, but something about the way she said it, quiet, final, held him back. They ate as the wind picked up. Rain began to hit the windows again, slow at first, then hard. The lamps flickered. The fire flared, then dropped. Claire said, I don't like this one. It sounds angry. He listened. She was right. The waves were striking the rocks harder than before, irregular, desperate. He said, Do you want to go inland for the night? No, she said. Running doesn't help. It follows you. She stood, went to the window. Her reflection moved in the glass beside the storm's reflection outside. One calm, one wild. I used to love storms, she said. They meant change. Now they just remind me what can be taken. He walked to her side. What was taken? She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the water. You can't keep the sea from doing what it wants, she said. It taught me that early. He watched her profile against the darkening light. And yet you still live by it. I don't live by it, she said. I live with it. There's a difference. The wind shook the shutters. The door groaned. He said, If it gets worse, we should move upstairs. She turned to him. You're always thinking of what comes next. It's the only way I know how to keep things from breaking. She smiled a tired smile. You can't keep this from breaking, Daniel. That's not what it's for. The storm hit full near midnight. Rain slashed sideways across the windows. The wind howled through the chimney like a voice that couldn't find words. They sat near the fire again. The flames bent and fluttered. Claire said, You know what I miss most? What? Stillness. The kind that comes when everything makes sense, even for a breath. Maybe that's what this is, he said. No, she said softly. This is the breath before it breaks. Lightning flashed, so close it filled the room with blue light. For a second her face was all plains and shadow, her eyes wide and bright. Then darkness again. He reached for her hand. It was cold but steady. Claire, he said. Yes. If you could leave this place, would you? She shook her head. No. It's the only thing that knows me anymore. He squeezed her hand. Maybe that's the trouble. She looked at him. You mean it knows me too well? I mean it won't let you go. The thunder rolled over them long and deep. Later, when the worst of it had passed, she rose. I want to see it, she said. He caught her wrist. It's dangerous. So am I, she said and slipped free. He followed her to the door. The rope strained against the wind but held. She pushed the door open just enough to look out. The rain stung their faces. The sea was wild again, white foam breaking over the rocks, the waves crashing against themselves. The horizon was gone. Claire stepped out onto the porch. He grabbed her arm. Don't, he said. She shook her head. It's all right. You'll get pulled in. I need to see it, she said. just to know it's still there. He stood beside her. The wind tore through his coat. For a long moment they just watched. Then she said, "It's like it's calling." "Maybe it is." She turned toward him, hair whipped across her face. "You hear it too?" "Yes." "Then you understand." "I do," he said. The rain hit harder. She closed her eyes and let it soak her hair, her clothes, her skin. He watched her standing there, unflinching, as if daring the sea to take her again. When she opened her eyes, there was something fierce and alive in them. "I'm not afraid of it anymore," she said. "I know," he said. And for the first time he believed her. They went back inside. The house smelled of salt and smoke. The lamps had nearly gone out. Claire sat by the fire, shivering. He brought a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked up at him, eyes still bright. "You think it'll calm by morning?" she asked. "Yes. It always does," she said. "Until the next one." He crouched beside her. "We'll be here for that too." She smiled, small and real. "Then write it," she said. "Write the next one before it comes." "I will." "Good. Maybe words can hold what we can't." She leaned her head against his chest, and the fire cracked behind them. The storm raged outside, but its sound had changed now. It was no longer the sound of fear. It was the sound of something being made new. When he woke hours later, the wind had gone quiet. The sea was still restless but less wild. Claire was asleep in the chair beside him, the blanket half fallen. He watched her for a long moment, then looked toward the window. The first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. He thought of what she'd said. Maybe words can hold what we can't. He reached for his notebook and wrote, "When the wind returns, it does not ask what it broke before." Then he looked back at her and whispered, "We'll see." Outside, the sea began to breathe again. Chapter 6: What the Sea Keeps. Morning came gray and hollow. The storm had gone, but the sea still moved like something remembering. Daniel stood on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold. The air smelled of wet wood and salt. Everything dripped. The railing, the eaves, the narrow path down to the rocks, all shining slick, alive. He could see pieces of driftwood scattered along the shore, a pale wreckage the tide had left behind. A gull picked at something in the seaweed, then rose, its cry thin against the still air. Claire came out a few minutes later, wrapped in his sweater. Her hair was loose, darkened by sleep and salt. "Looks worse than it is," she said. "It always does after a storm," he said. She leaned on the railing beside him. "No real damage? Only what we expected." "That's the way of it," she said. "The sea takes what's loose, leaves what holds." He nodded. "And you think that's mercy?" She smiled faintly. "No. I think it's habit." They walked the beach in silence. The sand was littered with shells, branches, and the faint shimmer of jellyfish left by the tide. Claire picked up a smooth piece of glass, sea-worn to a pale blue. She held it up to the light. "It was sharp once," she said. "Maybe it still is." She looked at him. "You think the sea dulls what it touches?" "I think it changes it." She turned the glass in her fingers. "Then maybe that's not so bad." He nodded. "No. Maybe not." The waves rolled in slow now, softer, like a heartbeat slowed after running. He said, "You lost something once, didn't you?" "To the sea." She kept walking. For a long while she didn't answer. Then, "A man." He looked at her. She said, "Not the way you think. He didn't drown. He left. Said he couldn't stay where the sea was louder than his thoughts." Daniel said, "Did he ever come back?" "No. But sometimes I think the sea keeps the echoes of people who can't." They stopped near the rocks. The tide had pulled back far enough to reveal a shallow pool, clear and still. Small fish darted within it, flashes of silver in the dim light. Claire crouched beside it, her reflection rippling. "Look," she said. "It always leaves something alive." They spent the rest of the morning repairing what the wind had undone. Daniel resecured the porch door, replaced 2 shingles. Claire swept the steps. It was quiet work, steady and companionable. Around noon the sun pushed through. The light hit the water in shards, bright and cold. Claire said, "You'll leave soon, won't you?" He looked up from his work. "Why do you say that?" "Because that's what people like you do. They come here to remember, and when they've remembered enough, they go." He set the hammer down. And what if I haven't remembered enough yet? Then you'll stay until it hurts to. He smiled a little. You make it sound like penance. It is sometimes, she said. For both of us. He wanted to tell her he wasn't like the others. That this place and she had done something he couldn't name but didn't want to leave. But he didn't say it. The air between them held too much truth already. That evening they walked again. The light was gold now, the kind that makes even broken things beautiful. Claire said, when I was little I thought the sea was alive in a way people weren't. That it had moods, hungers. My mother used to tell me it keeps what it loves. And what does it love? Anything that doesn't fight it, she said. Anything that lets itself be carried. He said. And the rest? It wears them down, she said quietly. Until they learn how to let go. He looked at her and she met his gaze. There was something in her eyes. Not sadness exactly but a kind of knowing. They sat on the rocks as the sun went down. The sea had turned silver, smooth and endless. Daniel said. When the storm came I thought you'd go out there. I almost did. Why didn't you? She smiled. Because for once I wasn't alone. He looked at her, the line of her jaw in the fading light. You don't have to be. She shook her head. You say that like it's a choice. It is. No, she said. It's a mercy. The last of the light faded. They sat without speaking, listening to the slow rhythm of the waves. That night she dreamed. He knew because she murmured in her sleep, her hand reaching toward something unseen. He didn't wake her. He only watched, the lamplight soft across her face. He thought of what she'd said. The sea keeps what it loves. He wondered then what that meant for people like them. Restless, uncertain, always standing half in one world and half in another. He took up his notebook again and wrote, the sea doesn't forgive, but it forgets kindly. Then he closed it, and for the first time in years he slept easily. In the morning the world looked new again. The sky was clean and the air sharp. The tide had gone out far, farther than he'd ever seen it. Claire stood where the waterline used to be, staring at something half buried in the sand. He walked to her. What is it? An old oar, she said. From a boat long gone. He looked closer. The wood was gray, worn smooth, but the shape was still there. She said, funny, isn't it? How the sea keeps what's useless, and gives it back when we've forgotten it. He smiled. Maybe that's how it forgives. She brushed sand from the oar and handed it to him. Take it. Why? You'll need something to steer with when you go. He looked at her for a long time. You're sure I will? She nodded. Everyone does, eventually. He held the oar. Felt heavier than it looked. The sea whispered just beyond them. The sound of something endless turning in place. Claire said. Promise me one thing. What's that? When you write this, don't make it sad. He smiled. I'll try. Don't try, she said. Just remember it the way it felt. The calm after. The way the light hit the water. The quiet that didn't hurt. He nodded. I can do that. Good, she said and turned back toward the house. He watched her walk up the path, the hem of her dress brushing against the wet grass. Then he looked at the sea one last time and said quietly, keep what you must. The wind moved through his hair, soft, almost kind. The horizon shone pale and wide. He turned toward the house, toward her, carrying the oar and the sound of the waves that had never stopped speaking. Chapter 7. The things left ashore. The days turned mild again. The air lost its bite. Gulls nested on the cliffs and their cries carried far over the water. Daniel stayed. Not because he had to, but because the act of leaving felt too sharp, too soon. The house, the smell of salt, the low hum of the waves, they had settled inside him, in the quiet spaces where memory usually hides. He rose early each morning, made coffee, and watched the sea climb and fall. Some days he wrote. Other days he only sat with the notebook open, waiting for the first line to show itself. Claire spent her mornings by the garden or walking the shore. She moved slower now, like someone learning to listen again. They spoke little about what came next. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was understanding. One morning he found her by the shed, sorting through a pile of weathered nets and rope. What are you doing? He asked. Clearing what's no use, she said. The wind brings plenty of that. He smiled. You sure you want to throw it out? Looks like it's seen better storms. She looked up at him, squinting in the sun. Everything has. He picked up a piece of rope, rough and frayed. You keep anything? Sometimes. If it still holds. He nodded. That seems fair. She straightened, brushing her hands on her jeans. You've been thinking of leaving. He paused. I have. Good, she said. You should. The words came plain and calm, but they stung. You want me to go? He asked. She shook her head. Want's got nothing to do with it. The sea doesn't ask if we're ready. It just shifts. He said. And you? I've already gone once, she said. It's your turn. That afternoon he walked the shore alone. The tide was low again. Small pools shimmered in the sand, each one holding a piece of the sky. He found a bit of driftwood shaped like a hand, fingers curled. He turned it over, brushed off the sand, then carried it back. Claire was sitting on the porch reading an old book. She looked up. Find something. Only this. He held it out. She smiled. Looks like it's reaching for something. Maybe it's letting go. She nodded. Maybe that's the same thing. He sat beside her. They watched the light move across the water. I've been thinking, he said. About the book. The one I came here to finish. You found your ending? He shook his head. No. But I found what it's about. She closed the book on her lap. Tell me. He hesitated. It's about a man who learns that love doesn't end when people do. It just changes shape. She smiled faintly. Sounds true enough. He looked at her. You helped me remember that. She didn't answer right away. Then she said. Then it was worth something. The next morning the sea was calm again, too calm like a held breath. He went down to the rocks to watch the tide come in. Claire followed a little later, carrying a small wooden box. What's that? He asked. Things I found. Things the sea gave back. She opened it. Inside were pieces of glass, shells, bits of driftwood, a rusted compass that no longer pointed anywhere. Why keep them? He asked. To remember what returns, she said. And what doesn't? He picked up the compass. Doesn't work. No, she said. But it's still beautiful. He turned it in his palm, the needle trembling faintly. You ever think the sea keeps the best parts for itself? She smiled. I hope so. Someone should. They climbed the path up the cliff together. The air was heavy with the scent of the pines. At the top, she stopped and looked back toward the water. You'll leave tomorrow, she said. He didn't argue. Yes. You'll write about this place. I already have. She nodded. Good. Then it won't vanish. He said. Nothing real does. She looked at him then, long, steady, as if memorizing his face. You talk like someone who believes that. I do. Then you're luckier than most. The wind rose a little. Enough to move her hair. He thought again of that first night in the rain, how the sea had sounded then, uncertain, waiting. That evening they sat together on the porch for a long time. The air was cool, the horizon washed in soft color. Claire said, When you go, leave the notebook here. He looked at her. Why? Because stories belong to the place that made them. He smiled. I'm not sure Hemingway would agree. He might if he'd lived long enough to understand. Daniel laughed quietly. Maybe. She touched his hand. Leave it here, she said again. Then come back if you need it. He nodded. All right. They sat until the light was gone. The sea moved in slow rhythm below them, whispering against the rocks. At dawn he packed. The room felt smaller now, the air too still. He looked around once more. The cup with the crack, the chair by the window, her sweater draped over the armrest. He placed the notebook on the table as she'd asked. Then he went outside. Claire was waiting by the gate. She wore the same blue scarf she'd worn that first day in the rain. Morning, she said. Morning. He handed her the oar. You keep this. She looked down at it, smiling. Thought you'd need it. I will, he said. But not yet. She nodded. You'll know when. They stood there for a while, neither speaking. Then she said, Go before the tide turns. He looked toward the sea, already bright with the first light. "Will you be here?" he asked. She smiled. "Where else would I be?" He took a step back, then another. She didn't move. When he reached the bend in the path, he turned once more. She was still there, the scarf moving in the wind, her hand resting on the gate. He lifted a hand. She didn't wave, but he saw the faintest tilt of her head. An answer, or maybe just a promise. By the time he reached the road, the sun was higher. The air smelled clean again. He could still hear the sea, distant but steady. He stopped and wrote one final line in his pocket notebook. "What the sea keeps, it never loses, only lends to those who listen long enough." Then he closed the book, put it away, and walked on. Behind him, the sound of waves followed, soft and endless, until it became silence. Chapter 8: The Sound of Leaving. The morning air was crisp. Mist rose off the cliffs in thin, curling sheets. The sea below whispered like a memory half remembered. Daniel had packed lightly. The notebook rested in his coat pocket. The oar, she had insisted he carry, leaned against the side of his small car. Every detail of the house and shore had settled into him overnight. Claire met him at the gate. Her scarf was loose in the wind. She did not speak. She simply watched him, steady as the tide. He said, "I should have left yesterday." "You didn't," she said. "And now you're here." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes timing is another kind of storm." She nodded. "It is. And sometimes it passes without notice." They stood there for a long moment, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. He slid into the car. She remained by the gate, and he watched her until she became small against the cliffs. The engine rumbled. He drove slowly, as if the road itself might ask him to stay. "Goodbye," he said quietly, to no one but the wind. The road curved through the hills, damp and lined with pines. The smell of wet earth rose from the ground. Every mile stretched time differently. The sea, when it appeared again, seemed farther than memory allowed. He thought of Claire standing on the porch the morning before, hands on the railing, hair lifted by the wind. He thought of her eyes in the storm, wide and fearless. The notebook pressed against his chest. The oar beside him leaned lightly against the passenger seat. He could feel its weight, not heavy but constant, a reminder of what the sea had left behind. By mid-morning he stopped at a small overlook. The cliffs fell steeply to a waterline mottled with foam. He sat on the hood of the car and wrote in his notebook, careful, deliberate. "Distance doesn't erase the sound. It only changes its pitch." He read it over. Felt true. It captured the edge of leaving without bitterness, the quiet ache of absence without regret. The road stretched on. Trees blurred past. He passed towns he remembered only faintly. Each one seemed ordinary and too full of something else, something that belonged to another life. Around noon he stopped at a diner. He ordered coffee and toast. The waitress asked if he was traveling alone. "Yes," he said. She nodded, as though that explained everything. He wrote in the notebook again. "The sea is patient, keeps what it loves and returns it slowly if ever." A man at the counter asked him what he was writing. Daniel smiled faintly. "Notes for a story," he said. "About the sea?" the man asked. "Partly," Daniel said. "Mostly about people and what they leave behind." The man nodded, sipped his coffee. The sound of the spoon against the cup was the only answer. He drove on. The highway cut through forests now, the sun high, and the wind in the car pressed lightly against his face when he cracked the window. He thought about Claire. He thought about the calm mornings, the storm nights, the quiet porch, the oar, the notebook, the way she had said everything returns eventually. He realized he had brought more than memory. He carried the rhythm of the place with him. Every wave, every gust of wind, every quiet that had lived between them was now folded into him. By late afternoon he stopped at a rest area overlooking a wide river. The water moved slowly, different from the sea but still familiar in its own way. He opened the notebook. A page was blank. He wrote, "The sound of leaving is never loud. It is the hush behind a door, the footsteps fading along a path, the echo of someone standing on the edge and watching you go." He closed it. The river stretched below him, wide and steady. Somewhere in its movement he thought he could hear the sea, soft, distant, patient. He stood, took a deep breath, and let the weight of everything settle. The road ahead was long, but the past, he knew, traveled lightly when held like this. carefully with attention without trying to keep it still. The sun lowered behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the highway. Daniel got back into the car and started the engine. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "Keep what you must." The notebook and the oar leaned against him, silent companions. The road carried him forward. The sound of leaving was soft, but it was real, and it was enough. Chapter 9. Letters. The sea returned. Weeks passed. Daniel kept the notebook close. He wrote every morning, filling pages with the wind's memory, the smell of salt, the rhythm of waves, and the quiet spaces between thoughts. One afternoon, a letter arrived at his small apartment. The envelope was unremarkable, postmarked from the coast. Inside, a single sheet of paper, neat handwriting he recognized immediately. "Daniel," it began. "The sea has returned pieces I thought lost. I send them to you now in words, in memory, in thought. Read them carefully, for they will not wait forever." He held the paper, folded between his fingers, the ink smudged slightly from his own damp hands. It smelled faintly of salt. He read it aloud, quietly, so no one could hear but the air in the room. "I found the shell you left by the tide line. The driftwood shaped like a hand. The glass that once cut the light. The oar has been steady, though the sea tested it again. It is still yours, still necessary, still a guide. I watch the waves, Daniel. I see the horizon. It moves differently than it did when we were there together, yet it remembers. I do too." He sat back in his chair. The pen in his hand trembled slightly. Then another letter came a few days later. This one shorter. "I almost went back to the water yesterday. The tide reminded me of you. The wind whispered your name in the pines. I stayed, but only because I thought you might still be listening." Daniel smiled faintly. He wrote a line in the notebook beneath the letters he had received. Distance changes sound, not meaning. Over the weeks, a pattern formed. Each letter came without warning, a small parcel of thought, memory, or observation. Sometimes she wrote about the sea, its moods, the driftwood, the storms and calms. Sometimes she wrote about herself, the house, the garden, her solitude. And sometimes she wrote about him. "I saw someone today who reminded me of your hands, the way you hold a notebook like it might fly. I remembered the porch and the firelight. It's strange how present absence can feel." He read it twice. Then he wrote back, not just in reply, but as a gift to her, as if each word might carry him closer to the place they had shared. "Claire, the sea remembers what the heart forgets. I carry you in that memory, quiet and patient. When the wind rises again, I will think of your hair, your hands, the way you let the storm pass without fear." One evening, he returned to the river overlook. The sun dipped low, and the water caught the light like scattered silver. He opened the notebook and began reading aloud the letters, words spilling into the quiet, the wind carrying them gently toward the horizon. When he finished, he wrote beneath the last letter, "The sea is patient. So are we, in our own way." Weeks became months. Daniel kept writing. Claire kept sending letters. Neither asked for more than that. The letters were enough. Reminders, confessions, echoes. One afternoon, he received a letter that carried both the smell of salt and the unmistakable weight of decision. "Daniel, the sea is quiet again, and I can hear its memory in the garden, in the house, in myself. I want you to know, the calm isn't an end. It's a chance to carry forward what we found there without needing to go back. Keep the notebook. Keep the oar. Keep the memory of us in the storm. But remember, what the sea gives freely, it asks nothing in return." He held it for a long time. The room was still. The river outside moved slow, steady. He wrote beneath it, "I will. Always." Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it in the notebook, beside the oar he had carried from the coast. He looked out the window at the river and thought, the sea is never gone. It only returns in pieces, in words, in memory, and in the quiet that comes after. That night he dreamed of the shore. The wind was soft. The waves reached up, silvered, patient. Claire stood at the edge, waiting. She smiled, not with expectation but with understanding. He woke with the notebook on his chest, the pen in his hand, the letters beside him. He wrote one final line. "What the sea returns is never lost. It is only lent to those who listen long enough." Outside, the world held the hush of the tide. Inside, he felt the same quiet, the same pulse, the same patience. He knew then that leaving hadn't ended anything. It had only begun a different rhythm. A rhythm of memory, of distance, of letters returned. The wind shifted softly, carrying a scent of salt and promise. And he listened. Chapter 10: The Horizon Between Us. The morning was pale, quiet, and infinite. Daniel woke before dawn. The notebook lay open on the table. A single letter from Claire rested atop the pages. The light caught the edges, a thin line between shadow and clarity. He poured coffee and sat by the window. The river below glimmered faintly, a thread of silver through the morning haze. The world felt large and yet intimate. Claire's words, written in her careful hand, reminded him of everything they had shared. Storms, calm, absence, presence. The sea always remembers. So do we. He smiled softly. He didn't need to respond. Some messages existed to be held, not answered. Later, he walked to the edge of the overlook. The oar leaned against his shoulder. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and pine. The horizon stretched wide, silver blue, empty in the best way. He thought of Claire on the porch, the way her hair caught firelight, the way she let the storms pass. He thought of the letters, the notebook, the moments that had passed between them like tides rising and falling. He realized then that the space between them, the miles, the days, the silence, wasn't absence. It was the horizon itself, visible, shaping the view, a line that separated and connected at the same time. He began to write. Not a story, not a letter, not an account of the past. Just words. The horizon is patient. It waits while the wind and tide decide what to return. It asks nothing, offers nothing, yet it shapes everything we see. We live in the light it touches. We remember in the shadows it holds. And sometimes it is enough to watch it quietly, knowing what we have carried is never gone. The pen paused. He read the line aloud. The sound of the river below, the distant gulls, the whispering wind all carried it, small and true. By afternoon, he drove slowly back toward the coast. The road unfolded, familiar yet changed, like the memory of a storm long past. He parked near the house just beyond the cliffs. The tide was low. Driftwood lay scattered. The oar he had carried for months rested in the trunk. Claire was there waiting. Not as an interruption, not as a demand, but as the shape of the place itself. Steady, alive, present. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he said. They walked to the porch together. Neither needed to speak. The light and the wind said everything. He handed her the notebook. "For the next storm," he said. She nodded. "And the next calm." They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the horizon. It stretched endless, silver blue, patient. "I suppose we can't keep it," he said. "No," she said. "But we can remember it. And that is enough." The wind rose a little, teasing her hair. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "Do you ever regret coming back?" he asked quietly. "Not once," she said. "I learned something the sea already knew. What is meant to return always will." He looked at her, then at the water, then back at her. "I think I understand now." "I think you do," she said. They watched the horizon together. The sea, the light, the memory, and the space between them all seemed infinite and kind. Daniel felt the quiet pulse of something enduring. Storms pass, tides retreat, people leave, yet what is carried never disappears. It waits, shaping the edges of life, holding pieces we thought were lost. He whispered softly, "Thank you." She squeezed his hand. "For staying," she said. And there, with the wind carrying their quiet words, the waves carrying what they could not hold, and the horizon stretching endlessly before them, they simply stood. Neither spoke, neither moved, except for the slow, steady pulse of breath, the light on the water, the pull of memory and presence, together and apart at once. The sea was patient. So were they. And for that it was enough.